Hey y'all, I'm Zelda Fey. I'm a neuroqueer femme. I use they and she pronouns. I am a practicing espiritista, and I am also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado. I am in light of the protests nationwide. I live in Colorado, and the US um, slide into fascism and authoritarianism. I am seeing a lot online of pushback against therapists telling their clients to unplug or to disconnect as a way to preserve their mental health during the revolution, the uprising that we are having right now. And I think that is really valid criticism. I also have that criticism of like traditional therapy as an institution that does serve as a tool of the oppressor, essentially, to keep people pacified, to keep people complacent in systems of power and oppression. And so while I think that this criticism is incredibly valid, I also want to name that I don't see a lot of content, and it is out there, of course. Like, I'm not saying that this is brand new, but it's just something I felt called in my spirit to share that I don't see a lot of content of like, what do you do instead of that? Because the reality is that it is important to apply a non-polarizing approach to this as well. That when therapists are often like, sometimes therapists are actively working in this in effort of the status quo. But a lot of times there is also the reality that we are not built as humans to be constantly like plugged in to the trauma that is happening all over the world, right? Our nervous system, we didn't like evolve alongside technology. We have had like a technological revolution. Our nervous system doesn't really know the difference at this point of something that is happening that we're witnessing that's happening on the other side of the world and something that's happening to us. Now, this is really beautiful in terms of our interconnectedness, our empathy, the reality that we are all interconnected. And it is also meaning that people are experiencing an immense amount of vicarious trauma, which puts them in a position where they are actually less resourced to participate effectively in the revolution, where we are all invited and required and necessary to live in the world that we want to live in. And so this is an intention, like my intention behind making this is to offer alternatives for those healers who are working with clients and want to hold the both and of being able to support people in downregulation and grounding and being able to fill up their reserves while also staying actively engaged with building the future that we want to live in. Because it truly is a time where all of us are very necessary. So, the first reason that I want to offer, this is not even one of the things, but it is something that sometimes I even utilize as psychoeducation for my clients, if they don't know about it already, is that the reason that it can be so useful for healers to have this both and in mind is that one of the things that we work on is widening our window of tolerance, particularly in trauma treatment, right? We can experience a lot of things that decrease our window of tolerance. I'm going to make another video that goes into more in depth the window of tolerance with like some graphics and stuff, but this is a concept that is very prevalent, very foundational in a lot of trauma healing. So if it's not something you're personally familiar with, I encourage you to look that up and find some more information on the window of tolerance. But if we continuously downregulate someone and don't encourage them to engage in things that are challenging, we actually serve to decrease someone's window of tolerance, the things that they can tolerate while staying engaged, while staying calm, while staying focused. If you think about like vagal system, like there are different corresponding to like this as well. And that's something that, like I said, I'll address in a different at a different time, or you can absolutely find lots and lots of great resources of this on your own. But in terms of like effective supportive therapy, one of the things that is ideal or healing work as general is to widen our window of tolerance because we cannot control our conditions and our experience externally all the time. For instance, if we're thinking about triggers, not engaging with content that is that is distressing to us, that is one way to remove the distress, but it doesn't serve to increase our capacity to engage with content like that in the future, right? Whereas being able to regulate is something that does actually help us, like being able to regulate and titrate. And this is the first thing that I do with clients is I will talk about in terms of psychoeducation, these two concepts. One is the window of tolerance, and one is our capacity to titrate and the value of titrating. And this is also kind of like a lens of dialectical thinking, right? That if we do encourage someone to disengage from something because there's a sense of like I have to just watch and witness and I can't do anything, almost like a frozen fear response, like a frozen sympathetic nervous system response, right? This is like think of like a possum playing dead or a bunny spotted in the field, frozen, right? This is a fear response, a danger-oriented response. It's not actually helping move people into meaningful action. So rather than having, oh, disengage from that, put up boundaries around that, and just kind of like like compartmentalize and set that aside, instead, I often help people understand what their window of tolerance is, what are cues that they can start recognizing when they are outside of their window of tolerance and how they can have boundaries around engaging with news that support them in either widening or recognizing when it's actually not useful and actually is contributing to more of a collapse and an inability to engage with current events or whatever their role is. And I'll talk more about that later. But so the window of tolerance is one. So like identifying markers. I am a somatic therapist, so I talk about how that shows up in the body, things like that. The second is the concept that I talk about. This is like the first out of three things I do. The first is like psychoeducation, right? And so under this, these are the two main concepts, window of tolerance and then titration. I usually do talk about dialectical thinking because I find that very important in general, even if I'm not doing DBT with folks. I think dialectical thinking is crucial. Non-binary thinking is another way to think of it. So titration is, if we think about it in chemistry, is usually where that term is used, at least as far as I was taught. It's like when you kind of like add something to another liquid, only to the extent that it can actually like mix in, rather than dumping a bunch in so that it like sinks to the bottom, right? Not adding like more honey than your tea can actually absorb. And so the idea of titration is to add only as much as can be absorbed by the system at any given time, and to maybe like increase and then decrease. And so the idea of titration is that you can microdose the news essentially, or find ways to engage with content that are less dysregulating for your nervous system, right? That are allowing you to actually stay engaged, stay in community, stay awake to what's going on, but that don't actually overload or overwhelm or trigger past patterns, right? And because we don't really want people to go into all or nothing thinking around the revolution anyways, because this is a long game. This is a long game. People have been fighting this fight since before I was born, before we were born, and they will be fighting it after in some ways, right? And I am not saying that this is the only fight, but this is something that I think is really important, historically speaking, is to remember that this is not like the sense of urgency, right? Like almost acknowledging that that sense of urgency, even though sometimes things are like if we think of like rapid response networks, sometimes those are immediate, but there are ways to downregulate, and we cannot exist in a state of urgency or emergency all of the time without getting burnt out or having negative consequences. And so these concepts are really helpful, and I find that they help people to also like integrate that idea and help integrate it into their systems of values. Now, values work is not on this list actually, but I will throw that in as like a honorable mention that identifying people's values and why it's so activating and distressing to them can be really helpful in this other work that can help people feel aligned and find their role and feel empowered to engage in radical and exciting magic that our world needs. Yeah. So that was number one is psychoeducation around these different terms. This is almost like yes and like Do I ever encourage people to unplug? Yes, of course. Like, I don't think doom scrolling for 12 hours, which is sometimes what we do when we are freaked out about what's going on. I do not think that's necessarily helpful or even supportive. It doesn't mean that not engaging is the alternative, right? So that's the first one. The second one is more of a somatic lens. I actually saw Prentice Hemphill had a video on their Instagram, and they have great books and resources available, and so do many different somatic practitioners. But is engaging with somatic resourcing for the body or whatever, as a healer, whatever tools you use to help people express and be present with emotions is supporting people and kind of like closing the stress loop. So in terms of like things that I'm referencing, thinking about the book Burnout by Amelia and Emily Nagoski, this is kind of the language of like closing the stress cycle. I think of like somatic abolitionism and that kind of work. I think of Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands type of work of how to engage with social oppression while like inviting the body into the experience, seeing the body as a vital source. Um, these things you might, as a healer, like I hesitate to give a ton of different resources that you should use with clients because I don't know what your skill set is. And this may be something that you in particular need some additional training in to be able to provide. That doesn't mean it needs to be like clinical training. You can get that kind of training in books and online and from community resources and community offerings. There's so much great resource, but it is something that I recommend being very comfortable in, or at least like feeling grounded in yourself as a practitioner before throwing it out at clients, just because often people benefit from being walked through them. Some ones that are not as difficult involve doing some types of breath work. If you're trained in DBT, this is like doing the tip your body chemistry type of things that help downregulate the nervous system. It could be if you are trained in like uh other types of like somatic processing type of things. It could be breath oriented, like doing Huberman's sigh, doing humming, doing emotional freedom technique, like the tapping, doing, if you're an EMDR, helping people doing grounding visualization techniques, and helping people do somatic things like shaking, breathing into different areas of the body, pressing their back against the something solid and like scanning their eyes gently. There are so many somatic tools that can be used because our body, when it is freaked out, needs body tools to be able to help it. And it is great to be able to meet the mind as well, but ultimately that is something that is really important in supporting people in experiencing what's happening and being able to like allow that to sequence through their body and their experience rather than getting stuck in there and creating this stress loop that also, again, often leads to collapse, inaction, incapacity, or burnout and illness. So these are things that this is kind of the second thing. And this can also look like expressive art, grief process, narrative process. Like there's no way for this, but this is like an emotional expression. So rather than saying like, oh, let's decrease the emotionality, let's remove these, let's do like behavior training to track the things. It's more like, let's be present with this reality, what this is bringing up, and encourage the mind not to spin out, but to feel what that feels like right here and now. And then also to orient towards the relative safety in the here and now so that the body understands that you're safe, right? Conceptually, all of our liberation is interconnected, and that is true. I don't think that's just conceptually, I think that's literally. But it is also true that we are not in the same moment as we are watching on the screen in the same kind of danger that we might be witnessing online. Right. And those are important because once that is at our door, we want to be able to respond accordingly. We don't want to be so complacent and freaked out that we can't actually respond and react in a way that is like preserving safety and liberation for ourselves and our communities. So that is number two. Number three, this is more of a finding their role in the revolution. Now, earlier I mentioned values work, so I'm going to like slide that into this option. This is more like actively seeing our emotions. Once we have felt them, once we're feeling them, as like, yes, it's great to witness things. Witnessing is very important, but witnessing things on social media is only so important, right? Like, it is useful, it is good to be exposed to information, and this is a personal opinion. There's nothing against people who are content creators. But I saw a video, I can't remember who it was. If I remember, I'll try and tag them. But I saw a video about someone saying that a lot of the reason that people don't have a lot of change from social media, like things are like not sticking or anchoring, is that a lot of people online are more like gossip bloggers who shifted to social media content that is or shifted to social justice content, right? So it's not necessarily like positioned in like community organization, direct action. It's kind of like disconnected. That now does that am I saying that that discounts it, that that's not important? No, I think that reporting, journalism, exposure, witnessing, providing awareness to what's going on, awareness is important. And it's only one piece of the puzzle. And if that's not your piece of the puzzle, like if that's what you're up to, then great. Like that's something, then you already know some of your role in the revolution, right? It's like educating others, helping other people be more aware and wake up to what's going on. Fine, that's absolutely a calling. But if that's not their calling, then that's not necessarily the only thing to engage with, right? And so instead of kind of like doom scrolling, which is often what people are trying to discourage as a pattern for understandable reason, because doom scrolling, in fact, does support like capitalism, like people when they're pacified are like more likely to click on different links and buy things to help, get a dopamine circuit going. They're more susceptible to things like propaganda and to fear mongering, right? They're less using their like discernment to like fact check things because they're freaked out and they're just like scrolling on their phone and like taking in information. So this is not saying like, but that's just naming that like, yeah, that's only one thing that we can do, right? Like saying unplug, it's like, oh, yes, and also what else, right? And so the other thing that I think is really important right now is supporting people in feeling empowered to find and identify their role in the revolution, their role in the social change ecosystem, so to speak. So that language, the social change ecosystem, is actually from buildingmovement.org. It is based on work done by Deepa Iyer. And this is something that I will link in the comments. It's something I find really useful. I haven't been trained in it necessarily, but I do think that one of the things that this does, kind of like values work, is it allows a jumping off point to be able to start conversations with clients about, oh, your values are coming up right now. This doesn't feel right. What are you equipped to do? What is your like skill set, strengths, needs, access needs, right? What are your emotional, mental, and physical health needs? What are your skill sets and strengths and excitements? What fills you up? What feels sustainable, right? These are all things that are important to the revolution as well. And so going through things like the building movement, social ecosystem of change, going through different values work, doing more like almost like career counseling-esque, but tailored to the revolution of like if people are like asking, because a lot of times people ask the question of what can I do? How could this be happening? Right? Because it is horrifying. And sometimes it's like you don't need a whole graph. You can just join a local organization that makes a difference, like a rapid response network, like going to a book club where you actually talk about things and see what people in your community need, joining a community garden, joining other sort of community service organization, right? Like there's so many things to do, but this does help, like this values and this other thing does help with finding out and supporting people and witnessing what actually is like feasible for them and gives an alternative to being like frozen in fear or feeling reactive and like the only option is to engage in things that are unsustainable for their nervous system. So, those are the three things that And I have many more, but these are the things that I often engage in, which come up a lot. I also do a lot of active, like uprooting of internalized oppression work, so like anti-racist, feminist, um, queer centric and celebratory, like neurodivergent affirming, right? This is kind of anti-ableist, right? Like these are all steeped into the work that I do. They're steeped into my values. But and so this like comes up a lot. It has come up a lot before now, but it also is coming up more and more and should be. Like people who are fully disconnected from this in their lives are looking around and saying like how can I imagine things being different than they are? How can I contribute when I am stuck in this place? And realistically, the world is going to need restructure, where we do need a change. We're functioning in capitalism in a way that we need to reimagine and re-envision so that we have a feasible collective supportive future that for like humankind on the planet, frankly. And so this is very, very important work that people are doing. And I do think that it is helpful to have resources of not just what not to do, but what to do also. Now, this is not comprehensive at all. So, this is just some of the ideas that I love that I just felt so called to share in this moment. My heart is sending out so much love to LA and to the protests that are happening today, everywhere, and to the people of Gaza. And I would love to know if you are a healing artist or if you work with one and you have tools that you love. Let me know in the comments what your approaches, your dialectical approaches for both and are for encouraging people to both not see themselves as disposable and also not see the revolution as something that they either need to choose between, like self-preservation. Like this is an interdependence, right? What tools help you foster interdependence in your clients and help to make the revolution sustainable? I would love to know. Always adding more tools to my toolbox and love to create collective resources. So many blessings. I will see you next time. Bye for now.